Maybe it was by accident that things came undone this year. That Antonio Brown's relationship with Ben Roethlisberger crumbled, that JuJu Smith-Schuster winning the team MVP happened to set Brown off just as this season came to a close. If it was, then the timing was awfully fortuitous for the superstar wide receiver. Why? As the calendar turned from 2018 to 19, the guaranteed money on the 4-year, $68 million extension Brown signed 2 years ago was running out. All that was left, in essence, was 3 team options, at $15.125 million for 2019, $11.3 million for 20 and $12.5 million for 21. Those set a ceiling for how much Brown could make, without guaranteeing him much of anything. So maybe Brown's frustration with the Steelers organization legitimately boiled over this fall. I heard that Brown became increasingly detached as the season wore on, and not necessarily bad, but different around those in the building, and maybe it's only coincidence that it lines up with his financial situation changing. Either way, lots of players are paying attention to what Brown just pulled off. The star wide receiver's big score could have a ripple effect that reverberates in other cities in the not-too-distant future, mainly because what he just did, regardless of the motives or level of premeditation, worked. With the trade to the Raiders, Brown went from $0 fully guaranteed to $30.125 million fully guaranteed. He went from $38.925 million over the next 3 years to $50.128 million. The APY, average per year, on that 4-year extension jumped from $17 million to $19.8 million. And you better believe other players, and their agents, are taking notice of how he did it. What's going to happen, one prominent agent said Sunday afternoon, is that superstar players are going to see their only leverage is to force a trade and get a new deal from their new team. Michael Thomas is going into a contract year in New Orleans. Ditto for Amari Cooper in Dallas. Julio Jones has no more guaranteed money left on the 2 remaining years of his deal in Atlanta, and was promised by management last summer that he'd get new contract this year. Odell Beckham, believe it or not, it is only a year away from being out of guarantees in New York. What Brown just showed all of them is, if you're a real superstar with leverage, being willing to get money can make you filthy rich. Which, truth be told, has been how it's always worked in the NFL. Excited for this week's MMQB, with the beginning of the league year, and all it brings with it, around 60 hours away. We've got you with a TikTok account of how Eric Weddle became a Ram, an outcome that couldn't have matched what he was looking for more perfectly. Why this is an important week for NFLPA, and one that could start to set the table for the 2021 lockout strike, what it'll be then. The reasons why the Chiefs would even look at the idea of trading Dee Ford. How pass rushers are about to get paid. The reasons for Sunday trading. Along those lines, a couple players who could be moved as a result of it. But we're starting with the biggest story of the week, and 2019 so far. After weeks of flying rumors, and a failed trade to the Bills, Brown finally got what we wanted from the Raiders, which was more money and to be away from Roethlisberger and his home of 9 years. And he'll take the reputation hit that comes with it. Let's empty the notebook here one more time with a few facts on how it all went down. The Raiders were identified by the Steelers as a trade partner early on. When I say early, I mean back before the Super Bowl, when Pittsburgh could still realistically expect a first-round draft pick in return. Oakland coach John Gruden loves veterans and openly discussed his team's need for a number 1 receiver after trading away Amari Cooper to the Cowboys. And Oakland had 3 first-round picks, thanks to the Cooper and Khalil Mack trades. GM Mike Mayock, very clearly, was disciplined about maintaining the team's draft position. He holds 4 of the top 35 picks. But the Steelers had their eyes on the Raiders throughout. Brown's demands intensified as the saga dragged on. A week ago, teams involved were under the impression that the star receiver would need tweaks to his deal, not a complete overhaul. with the baseline being just $13 million for the next 3 years. Tweaks to most suitors were doable. If there were only to be tweaks, the Steelers likely would have had a robust market. As Pittsburgh engaged teams last week, things changed. Like we've said in a couple places over the weekend, teams negotiating with the Steelers came to discover that Brown wanted to be the highest-paid receiver in the NFL again. All that came to a head with Buffalo moving towards an agreement with Pittsburgh, and getting permission to speak with agent Drew Rosenhaus about Brown's contract. The Bills' deal blew up, and they weren't the first team to bail because of the money. Oakland basically bought themselves value. The key thing to remember here is that plenty of teams will yield big money for a great player. And they'll also fork over high-end draft capital for one. But they're mostly loath to do both at once. So once it became Brown for draft picks and a ton of draft capital, an already tepid market collapsed. After the Bills' talks came undone, only 3 teams reached out to the Steelers: the Raiders, Eagles, and Redskins. Considering this is the first player in NFL history to post 6 consecutive 100-catch seasons, that dearth of demand is stunning, and a clear illustration of where this had gone. In the end, the reason the Raiders could get Brown for the number 66 and no. 142 picks in the draft is because of their willingness and ability to reach a revision of the contract with Rosenhaus that satisfied Brown. And even they had their problems getting there. At one point on Saturday, it looked like contract talks were on life support, only to be revived later in the day. So the Raiders got their man and their bargain. Where does this leave the teams? For the Steelers, they can now, finally, move forward after a couple years of drama fueled by Brown and Le'Veon Bell. They'll have 10 picks in April's draft, and 3 in the top 66, and 4 in the top 100. That said, there's no question that the return, or lack thereof, has to sting. Then again, softening the blow, there's Kevin Colbert's draft record at the position. Over the last decade, he drafted Mike Wallace, Emmanuel Sanders, Brown, Martavis Bryant, and Smith-Schuster, all outside the top 60 picks. There's a belief that 2018 rookie James Washington, the last year's no. 60 overall pick, could be the next one. Which gives you plenty of reason to believe Pittsburgh will be just fine at receiver. For the Raiders, it's fair to say that Mayock and Gruden effectively used the cap space they had, over $60 million, as a weapon to acquire a great player. Also, Gruden's track record with older receivers, going back to the Jerry Rice-Tim Brown tandem he rode into contention nearly 20 years ago, has been solid. And the Raiders maintained their controlling position on the first 2 nights of the draft. The risk, of course, is that Brown's issues at the end in Pittsburgh go with him to Oakland, and become a problem for Derek Carr. There's also the chance that Brown, 31, goes into decline before Mayock and Gruden can get the roster in a position to seriously contend. But if Brown's what he's been on the field for the last 9 years, and won't be what he was elsewhere for the last 2, this'd shape up as a steal for the new brain trust. On a 75-minute, 3-way phone call Saturday night, Eric Weddle, the newest Rams safety, and agent David Cantor walked me through the many cool details of how his situation played out over the last 9 weeks. But one detail I thought was particularly interesting was how Sean McVay played closer to the deal on Friday morning. Weddle met with McVay for 2 hours on Thursday, and the two were in the midst of a second meeting, one that lasted 2.5 hours on Friday morning, watching tape when it happened. As Weddle explained to me, McVay: "Eric, where did you learn your intuition, the movements, who taught you this?" Weddle: "I did it on my own." McVay: "What do you mean?" Weddle: "I didn't have a veteran to help me, I didn't have a guy to lean on when I was early in my career, I had to figure it out on my own." McVay: "Honestly, Eric, there's not one player in this league that could do what you do." Weddle: "Exactly. That's why I'm here, right?" "It was cool," Weddle said over the phone. "You want to be the best at what you do. If not, I don't want to be around you. I don't want to be with average, with a good." That's not in my DNA. So when you have one of the best head coaches have that much respect for you and want you to be a part of what they have, it's definitely humbling." Shortly after that interaction, McVay was referencing Weddle's ability to communicate and disguise pre-snap, and how he competes and makes things hard on the quarterback. McVay said to Weddle, "You tell me what you want to do. If you want to get this done, let's get it done." The coach offered to slow play it too, if Weddle wanted to take more trips. But by then, that wasn't necessary. "This is a dream scenario for me," Weddle responded. Here's how they got there. Evening of Jan. 6th, the Ravens season ends with a 23-17 loss to the Chargers in the wild-card round of the NFL playoffs, and Weddle tells the media that he'll either play for Baltimore in 2019, or he'll retire. Later that night, he sees his family off. He and his wife Chanel decided that this off-season they would move back to San Diego, their planned long-term home. Their 4 kids, Brooklyn, Gage, Silver, Camry, are set to start school there the next day. Jan. 7, Weddle had texted new Ravens GM Eric DeCosta, just taking over for Ozzie Newsome and a driving force in getting Weddle to Baltimore in 2016. "Hey, I want to meet with you before I go back to California." And that meeting happens the day after the loss to Weddle's former team. The two are close enough to where DeCosta had Weddle write reports at one point. So they spend an hour just talking. Then, the conversation moves to Weddle's future, and DeCosta is upfront about it, saying Weddle will likely have to take a pay cut to stay. Weddle was upfront too. He said he didn't think he should have to. But it was good. Weddle says, "It was never heated. I have a great relationship with him and the organization. I loved every second of it. I want to make sure everyone knows, there's no hatred, there's no bitterness." Later on Jan. 7, Weddle asks Cantor to come to breakfast at the Blue Moon Cafe in Baltimore. The two are exceptionally close. Cantor credits Weddle with saving his business by coming aboard prior to the 2007 draft, and Weddle calls Cantor, "my best friend." When Cantor arrives, with luggage in tow for his return trip to Florida, Weddle says, "I don't know if I'm gonna be here next year." Cantor responds, "What? You just had the #1 defense in football. You're going to the Pro Bowl." Weddle says, "Eric told me that maybe he and contract negotiator Pat Moriarty would reach out to you and just discuss a pay cut." DeCosta later confirms that for Cantor, who doesn't really believe the Ravens will go through with it. The two are firm, they won't take a pay cut in Baltimore. Feb. 27 March 4th, Cantor heads to Indianapolis for the Combine, and while he requests to meet with DeCosta there, it doesn't happen. In part because of that, Cantor's thinking, Weddle's crazy. No way the Ravens go through with it. He texts Weddle much the same, "Dude, you're crazy. It makes no sense." March 5th, 1 p.m. ET, while on the phone with franchise-tagged Cowboys DeMarcus Lawrence, Cantor sees DeCosta's caller ID pop up, and the agent takes the call. DeCosta cuts right to the chase. "I just want to let you know, I had a great conversation with Eric, and we're going to release him." Indeed, DeCosta and Weddle talked, with DeCosta telling the safety, "This may be the hardest thing I ever have to do in my career." Then he was like, "I'm going to call David." Weddle says, "I was like, I can call him for you. It's no big deal." He was like, "No, out of respect to you and David, I want to call him. I want to tell him." So immediately, within 5 seconds, David got the call. March 5th, 1:30 p.m. ET, Weddle calls Ravens defensive coordinator Wink Martindale, head coach John Harbaugh and secondary coach Chris Hewitt to say his goodbyes. Meanwhile, Cantor is calling the rest of the league with the news of Weddle's cut and says, he got responses from 29 head coaches and 24 GMs. "I purposefully made sure I counted them up," he says. Wanted to show Weddle the reaction. Cantor says, "Now, I've never had anything close to that response," and he told Weddle, "If you want to play, based on those responses, there will be interest there." March 6th, morning, Cantor has the Giants, Titans, Bucks, Texans, Chiefs and Bears interested in Weddle, with the Falcons and Eagles calling to say they love him, but only had a limited role to offer. So Cantor and Weddle come up with 3 criteria: a chance to win, proximity to San Diego, and a baseline of $5 million for 2019. At $5 million, you're still in the starting safety range, and for 34 years old, that's a significant deal. Cantor says, "There's a commitment on the team side. And in football the only way teams show their commitment is money." March 6, 4 p.m. Weddle and Cantor are anxiously anticipating his release becoming official with the release of the league's daily personnel notice. Cantor tells Weddle, "It's gonna get pretty crazy here at 4:05, 4:08, when the waiver wire comes out." And then it comes out, but all they hear are crickets. Cantor's numbers guy, Brian McIntyre, texts, "Eric's not on the personnel notice." Cantor texts DaCosta. DaCosta says there was a clerical error and Weddle would be on there on Thursday. "I was straight salty," Cantor says. "Here I am telling teams on Tuesday night, Eric's getting cut. And now a day plus later and there's nothing out there. My word is all I have in this business." March 6, 5:30 p.m. Cantor, who's now at his son's drum lesson, gets a text from Rams GM Les Snead, who says that the Ravens had just announced the move and explains that by the letter of the new law, that's good enough to allow another team to set up a visit. At this point, Cantor had received what he thought were courtesy return texts from McVay and Rams COO Kevin Demoff, and he figured the Rams weren't interested. But Snead, who was out of town, said they were in that he'd circle back after he got a better look at what was out there and return to Los Angeles. Cantor figures he getting the runaround, and he texts Weddle, "The Rams are out." March 6, 5:55 p.m. Snead texts Cantor again, "Where do you want to be financially?" Cantor tells Snead that $5 million was the baseline, and Snead asks if he can get Weddle in the building on Thursday. Cantor texts Weddle and says the Rams want to send a car and have him in the building on Thursday between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. local time. Then Cantor texts McIntyre, "He's gonna be a Ram." Cantor had 2 other teams, one was the Bears, champing at the bit to get the first visit. But now, they'll have to wait. "From the onset, the Rams were the top choice for what we wanted," Weddle says, citing the criteria. "There's no denying that." March 7, 4:15 p.m. Wanting to time the visits, it happened when Weddle was officially cut. The Rams car service arrived at 1:15 Pacific time, or just after the personnel notice, this time with his name on it, came out. The one hang-up now. Weddle still hasn't 100% decided whether or not he's actually going to play in 2019. That decision actually comes on the 3-hour ride up from San Diego to LA. During an interview he did with Bleacher Report's Mike Freeman, he's asked what the game means to him. In answering that question, "I immediately got the urge and the fire and the challenge to go out and be great again," he says. "And from there on in, I knew I was playing against, whether it was the Rams or someone else." Weddle had one other overriding thought on the long ride up I-5 related to old buddy Philip Rivers. "My first thought was that we're definitely not making this drive every day. Rivers does do it from San Diego, although the Chargers facility is considerably closer to San Diego than the Rams facility." March 7, 7:40 p.m. Weddle arrives at the Rams facility and heads to meet with McVay, with his guard up. He loved the Cowboys as a kid, and visited them as a free agent in 2016, only to walk away from an offer that wasn't quite what he expected. As a result of that experience, he won't be putting the cart before the horse, perfect as things may seem. He and McVay are together for 2 hours, and Weddle gets to see assistant head coach Joe Barry, who was with him in San Diego, as well as secondary coaches Ejiro Evero, who went to the same high school as Weddle, and Aubrey Pleasant. He also runs into defensive coordinator Wade Phillips. The two just missed one another in San Diego, but Weddle ran a version of Phillips's defense for 9 years as a Charger. March 7, 10 p.m. Dinner was set for 6 p.m. local time at Mastro's in Thousand Oaks. Weddle and Rams contingent get there an hour late. Weddle, McVay, Phillips, Berry, Evero, Pleasant and tackle Andrew Whitworth make up for it by spending 3 hours in the place, eating and talking and having a good time. March 8, 1:30 a.m. ET, Cantor reaches out to Weddle. "Dude, what's going on?" he says, not having heard from his client all night. Weddle says, "I knew within 2 minutes I wanted to be here." But Cantor still hasn't heard from the team. So he texts the team's chief contract negotiator, Tony Pastors. "I'll send something in the morning," Pastors responds. Cantor had informed Olivier Vernon that he was being dealt from the Giants to the Browns earlier in the evening, and had just been waiting to hear from Weddle after that. So he's salty again. He stayed up all night for what? March 8, 6:30 a.m. ET, Cantor wakes up and starts to jot out a deal. March 8, 9 a.m. ET, Weddle is back at the Rams facility again to meet with McVay. March 8, 11:30 a.m. ET, the car service arrives at the Rams facility for Weddle. The safety hits up his agent. "Did they send you an offer?" Cantor says no and figures the car means Weddle is going home without a deal. The truth is, the car is there to take him to the hospital to have his physical done. After Weddle arrives at the hospital, Pastors reaches out with a handful of proposals. Every proposal has a picture of Weddle and Cantor on it. "I give Tony a lot of credit for keeping it light," Cantor says. And simultaneously, the Bucks come out of nowhere with a substantial offer. "Don't you just really want to get this done with the Rams?" Cantor asks Weddle. At the end of the day, it's McVay, it's Phillips, it's the Rams, and they were 2 series away from potentially beating the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Cantor says. And Eric was like, "Yeah, let's just get it done." March 8, 12:30 p.m. ET, as negotiations near agreement, Cantor has 2 requests. First, he wants, in keeping with an old Rams tradition, to have palindromes in the contract. "What? Who cares?" Weddle says. "I care, and I want them in the contract," Cantor responds. So the base salary and all the incentives, as Cantor requested, are palindromes. Second, Cantor wanted clauses named after family members. So the Chanel number 13 and Chanel number 14 clauses are incentives tied to playing time and playoff wins in 2019 and 20. The Brooklyn, Gage, Silver and Camry Ice Cream Sundae clause, a tribute to his tradition of having ice cream after wins, is tied to playing time, making the Pro Bowl and playoff wins. Pastors didn't fight on that one. "It was really cool for David to think of that, and to think about my kids and what they mean to me and what they mean to David." Weddle says. "I mean, that's kind of in a nutshell is what our relationship is. To think of those kinds of things, in that moment, is definitely pretty special." March 8, 4:32 p.m. ET, there's a story to that tweet too. Weddle's phone was broken, and he forgot his Twitter password, so he couldn't even have Cantor log into his account to announce the deal. Cantor had all those LAs saved in his drafts for that moment, and decided to copy and paste them on his own timeline, which was how the whole thing was announced to the football world. So it was done. Weddle's playing for the coach he wanted to play for, in the city he wanted to play in, for the team his dad grew up rooting for, at a stadium he dreamt of playing in as a Southern California kid. As an added bonus, he and Chanel get free babysitting. Weddle's parents still live where he grew up, in Rancho Cucamonga. "I said this to a bunch of my buddies, just sitting back, how my career has come full circle, and what amazing opportunity that I have." Weddle said. "To be back home, to play for an amazing organization that my dad was a die-hard fan of growing up. And he gets to be able to cheer for his son in that Rams uniform. Being close enough to home and the emotions of it, they weren't really in the mix, and then all of a sudden things changed and boom, there's the lead dogs now. It's a dream come true. I can't even express how I felt in that moment or even now. I wish it was April 15th and I could get to the team and get working with my guys. Pretty good bet too, that McVay can't wait to see what that looks like either." 1. This is an important week for the NFLPA with its annual rep meetings happening in South Florida. Last year, around 100 players came. Yesterday, as the meetings kicked off, about 200 players were present. The current CBA expires in 2021, which means a potential work stoppage is now less than 2 years away, and the Players Association has already made moves. One would be the so-called Madden Fund, socking away licensing money, to try and influence its members to build the financial wherewithal to lose paychecks in 2021. In 2011, the owner's leverage was in the knowledge that the rank-and-file player would not be willing to miss games for the greater good, and the union has to find a way to change that. The union tried similar tactics a decade ago. The difference this time around is that it's starting earlier, and with more aggression. We'll see where it goes. In the meantime, the increased involvement is a good thing for the PA. I hope the guys get all the information player leadership wants to give, Union President Eric Winston texted late Sunday night. But importantly, I want to hear from the guys. What they care about, what they think is important, what they want to. It's worth mentioning here that the Wildcat tactics of Brown and Mack and Aaron Donald over the last year aren't exactly new. In the NFL, superstar players who go to the mat get rich more so than players unwilling to. You just see it less often now, largely because the 2011 CBA increased penalties for holding out exponentially. What guys like Mack and Donald have figured out is that, if you're a superstar, many of the fines will be forgiven, accrued seasons aren't as important as getting a huge payday, and withholding services remains the most effective way to make a team sweat. And it's fair to say that Mack and Donald's success emboldened Brown to fight like he did, even if his situation is a little different. Trade demand v. holdout. 3. The case of Chiefs pass rusher Dee Ford will be worth watching now, particularly with Justin Houston officially gone. So, why is Kansas City willing to part ways with a guy who posted 13 sacks last year? As I understand it, with new DC Steve Spagnuolo in town, Ford might not have a home in the base defense or even the early down sub-packages, because of his issues holding up against the run. That's not to say Ford can't play for Spagnuolo. He's a high-end pass rusher, and in today's NFL there's great value in that, even if it's all you do. But if Ford will be just a situational player for Spags, it's hard to justify giving him a contract in the range of what, say, Von Miller is making. Or even to pay him the $15.5 million attached to the linebacker tag, since he was at backer last year. From what I'm hearing, he would go for a second-round pick. The Packers and Niners remain in the mix, but both want to wait until after the first wave of free agency is complete, so they can take a look at pass rushers there, before getting more serious on the Chiefs star. 4. Lots of teams put money away for this offseason, looking at the pass rusher class and figuring there'd be rare opportunity to fill a need at a premium spot. Then, Ford, Jadeveon Clowney, Frank Clark, Lawrence and Grady Jarrett got tagged. Still, I don't expect pass rusher-hungry teams to back down, and that means rumors of numbers getting crazy on the market are flying.